You're listening to WCTN.
May we make a suggestion? Take your phone off the hook. Somebody might call during the next hour or so and interrupt your fun.
Getting down,
Bigger guests, bigger audio. You're listening to the West Coast Truth with Russell Scott, Season 4.
Rob, for the audience who doesn't know who you are, give us an idea of why you'd be on this program today. You're an extremely interesting guy. You're the subject of the film Ungrip by Ben Stewart, who was on this program. So give us an overview of who Rob and the Pagé family is.
Well, usually when people ask me that question, I say, I am that I am. I'm still exploring that question and trying to figure out, who I am and what my life is all about and finding my life purpose and that sort of thing. But to give you some background, I grew up on the farm, and as you may or may not know, in the film I talk about my brush with depression and suicide. And those experiences, though really tough, helped me learn a lot about myself and molded me into the individual I am now. In the last few years, I moved my family out onto the farm and out in the country, and we started building an Earthship and started growing our own food. I'm married and I have two sons. They're 18 and 16 here in a few months.
Rob, what is an Earthship?
Earthship. An Earthship is a passive solar-heated, earth-rammed house. The concept was developed by a fellow by the name of Michael Reynolds in Taos, New Mexico. And the whole concept is that you use automobile tires and ram them full of earth and stack the tires like bricks. And then the whole south wall of the house is windows. And when the sun shines into the house, it heats up the dirt in the tires and in the floor. And the thermal mass, the mass of the dirt, stores heat similar to the way a battery stores electricity. And so when the sun goes down, then the tires will start releasing the heat into the building. And as a result, I don't have a furnace in my house. And these houses, even if they were vacant, they would never freeze, even when it's minus 40 outside in the wintertime. So it was a way for us to remove our dependency from corporations like gas companies and power companies and water utilities, that kind of stuff. And we've been living in it now for 3 winters, and despite it not even being finished yet, it's still doing really well.
So an Earthship is a type of house, much like a cob house or a straw bale home. It's not your own name for...
No, that's the name that Michael Reynolds put to the house.
Okay.
So it's his design. He's the architect. He's been doing this stuff for 40 years. He's built Earthships all over the world. And in fact, they went down to, was it Haiti that had that big earthquake a couple of years ago? And, they're building Earthships down there to try to get people into housing structures. And the wonderful thing about this concept is that you can build these things with garbage that's laying around. There's car tires all over the place, and we used cellulose fiber, which is chopped up newspaper, for insulation in our ceiling, and we can scavenge materials all over the place to build these structures. So we're working on growing our own food, and I have a project in the works now in the next couple years where we can finish these Earthships, and we want to plant some orchards, look at some permaculture technology so that we can mitigate labor in growing our food. We're looking at animals to help us with the labor. Pigs, for example, are really good at tilling gardens in the spring and the fall. We're working this spring. We're going to be building a greenhouse that uses the same kind of technology as the Earthship, where we can grow food all year round, even in northern Alberta. And we're essentially building a greenhouse within a greenhouse, and that allows us to have 150 square foot space where in the wintertime we can grow lettuce, wheatgrass, plants that use low sunlight, mainly because in the wintertime we don't have a lot of sun, so that we can have greens, fresh greens through the wintertime. The whole process of what we're doing out here is trying to live in harmony with nature. And so instead of having tomatoes 12 months out of the year, which is not natural, we're learning to live within the cycles of nature, spring, summer, fall, winter. And that way we're not falling prey to the chemicals and all the nasty things that they do to our food in order to provide us with fruits and vegetables all year round. And so part of this process is to build a kitchen so that we can, can and preserve food in the fall when we're harvesting the crops that we've been growing all summer.
Is canning and preserving, is that natural, though?
Well, there's no chemicals based or in comparison to what you get out of cans in the store. Kind of like the squirrels and the bears, they store stuff up so that they can get through the wintertime. And that's the same thing that we're going to do, is we're going to store stuff up. And we can do that by canning, by freezing, smoking meat, root cellars, so that we can keep vegetables like potatoes and carrots through the wintertime. Those kind of technologies, so that we're not dependent on grocery stores for our fruits and vegetables and our food through the wintertime.
This is incredible stuff, Rob. And I want to talk more about this specifically, but this is fairly progressive thinking and somewhat audacious. I mean, how dare you?
Well, I don't know.
How does someone get into this mentality? Because you weren't always this way.
No, not at all.
So something happened.
I worked in IT. I worked in the computer industry for 20 years. We had a house in the city. We bought our groceries from the grocery store. We had the white picket fence and the dog and the 2 kids. It was a typical family. And to be honest, my depression and my recovery from depression taught me that I was responsible and I am accountable for my behaviors, my actions, my thoughts. And when our oldest son got a vaccination when he was just a baby, it adversely affected him tremendously. And to the point where he wasn't even ready for kindergarten or grade 1, and he's like a year or 2 behind, and the school wanted to put him on Ritalin and drugs, and we thought, no, we don't want to do that. So my wife started looking for alternatives, and she found a homeopath, and the homeopath treated him, and we saw just miraculous recovery and improvement, to the point where when he was in grade 6, he was spelling at a grade 12 level. And this is like a complete opposite of what he was like when he was in kindergarten or grade 1. Mm-hmm. And that spawned some more thoughts, and Carrie decided that she wanted to study homeopathy, and so she went to school. And that whole experience got us onto this path of recognizing that the medical industry is not necessarily out there for our best interests. Same with the food industry, because her training started exposing us to some of the truths about what they do to our food and how our food's treated and all that kind of stuff. And she also came home with the idea of the Earthship as well too. So that triggered us about 7-8 years ago to say, hey, we're responsible, we're accountable, so it's time to step up and do something about it, because we can't depend on anybody else to do it. And at that point, we decided, you know what, let's sell everything we got and move out and make a go of this. So that's pretty much what it took, and it wasn't easy. There's some anxiety and stuff there, but we persisted, and my wife and I, we have a good relationship.
Yeah, how did the kids respond to that, if I may ask such a personal question?
Well, the kids enjoyed it. They're enjoying the process.
So mom and dad weren't weirdos all of a sudden?
Oh, no. Kids are resilient, and we talk openly with our kids. We share with them things that we're learning. We teach them about the system and about what we're learning and what we're teaching. And I've left the decision up to them. If they want to, move back into the city and live that type of life, that's their choice. But at least they have both sides of the scenario, and they can make an informed decision. Mm-hmm. It's not like the type of choices I had when I was a kid. So I've been working really hard to make sure that they're well informed and that they can think critically and evaluate information to figure out whether it's true or not for themselves, and teach them how to learn. There's so much information out there. There's no excuse if you don't know how to do something. There's so much information out there that you can figure it out, or contact somebody to help you. So
there's always a way to outsource all of these things.
Absolutely.
So people tend to lay off the responsibility onto someone else, just like socialized medicine, for example, socialized healthcare.
Sure.
Why learn how to fix a wound when the
Sure.
doctor can do it?
And my hope is that the experience that we're giving them living out here and living the way that we do is that they will take responsibility for their life. But again, I can't change them. I can't force them to live a certain way. They still have their own free will, and all I can really do is walk my path, set the example, and pray that they see what I'm trying to do and see the message that I'm trying to portray, and make the decision for themselves to walk a similar path. But in the end, it's still their life and their journey, and they're going to make mistakes, and they got to learn things the hard way, just like you or I did when we were kids too, right? For some reason, us humans, we just love to learn the hard way. So it's going to be tough watching them learn that way, but I believe that I've given them the skills that they need to be successful in doing that.
There's a bit of a religious aspect to you. Is that a part of this?
I don't like the word religious. I'm a very spiritual man. I believe in the Creator, and I call him God, and I believe that I'm a soul spiritual being having a physical experience, and rather than me being a flesh and blood man searching for spiritual enlightenment. And because of that, I see things here. I believe everything here was created, and my job here is to learn how to have relationships with the earth, nature, myself, my wife, my kids, other people like yourself, relationship with my food. And in the end, I believe this all comes down to my relationship with the Creator, and it's all about relationships. And so I work really, really hard to build healthy relationships. And again, this was a lesson that I learned recovering from depression and suicide attempts, because I didn't have a good relationship even with myself. And it says in the Bible, love your neighbor as yourself. But you got to love yourself first before you can love anybody else. And so that was part of my process, to learn and accept me for who I am. And at that point, it makes it a lot easier for me to then accept people for who they are, and not force my will upon somebody else. I spent a lot of my life trying to force my will upon other people, and I tried to manipulate people, and I used guilt and passive aggressive behaviors, and I blamed my family and my boss and the government, and I blamed everybody for my problems, and in the end it all come down to me. So in fact, it's only me that I can really blame for any of my problems. So I now look at myself in the mirror and say, and I tell this to my students too, look yourself in the mirror, and can you admit that you're your only and biggest problem? And if you can't admit that, then I can't help you. But if you can actually admit that you're your only and biggest problem, then that's 90% of the battle. And now it's much, much easier than to accept responsibility and be 100% accountable, 100% responsible for your life, and not force your will upon somebody, and not put the burden on somebody else as well too. And so taking that type of responsibility means it's a lot of work, and you can't blame anybody. So for us, it was a huge shift in thinking from what we were even doing when we were in the city, and living out here in the Earthship and doing what we're doing out here is an integral part of that whole philosophy. And that all comes from that spirituality that both my wife and I share.
Rob, we're going to have to take a break, so we'll be back in 2 minutes with today's guest, Rob from Pagé. We're back with Rob. Rob, now you've left the city, you've moved into the country. Tell me more about life on the farm and at the Earthship.
Just give people an idea what life is like here. The Earthship is an integral part of what we do out here. We look after the Earthship, and the Earthship looks after us. We collect water off the roof. We have a tin roof, and we funnel all that water into two 2,000-gallon cisterns that we have in the earth berm. And we then treat it with hydrogen peroxide, and we put it through filtration, that kind of stuff. And that water then can be gravity fed into our house, or we can also pressurize a water system as well too. So we have some options there. And our power comes from solar panels. We also have a small little wind turbine. And in the wintertime, we do depend on a generator. But the generator accounts for maybe 20% of our power. The other 80% is all solar and wind. We do have a...
So you're completely off-grid?
Oh yeah, completely. There's no pipes or wires or anything running into this place.
Okay. So you basically purchased a plot of raw land?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. No services. There's no power lines, no gas lines, no nothing.
Just a road that gets you there.
That's it. We do have a fireplace. We do burn wood in the wintertime. The Earthship will maintain anywhere from 15 to 17 degrees. So we just use the fireplace just to bump it up to 21, just to make it comfortable. When we get it done, like we have an atrium, we have 2 rows of glass on the south. The second row of glass helps hold the heat in the wintertime.
Once again, an atrium, for those who don't know, is that an A-frame?
It's actually a row of glass and kind of leaning up against the Earthship.
Okay.
So it's a space of about 10 feet in front of our Earthship that's enclosed to minimize the heat loss out the front of the house.
Okay, so it's not a solarium.
Yeah, it's kind of like a solarium. Yeah,
okay.
Atrium, solarium. People use both words, but and we can use it as a greenhouse in the summertime, like it's that warm. But when we get that done, I suspect that the amount of wood that we burn to keep the place comfortable will be significantly less. The house isn't done yet, right? So we're doing this all out of pocket. We don't have a mortgage or any loans or credit cards or any of that kind of stuff. So when I get some cash, then we build a little bit more. And my thought was, I'd rather spend 5 years working on the house than getting a mortgage and working for 25 or 30 years to pay it off. And
seems to make sense. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's a little bit hard to work and it takes more time. living in a house that's not quite finished. We don't have the concrete floors in yet, so we do have dirt floor right now. We just covered it with some poly and some rugs just to make it comfortable, but it keeps us warm and it provides for us, and
How did your
we're not paying a huge mortgage.
How did your friends respond to this?
Well, some of our friends were excited.
Mm-hmm.
I know my mom and dad thought we were absolutely nuts.
They generally think this, though, don't they?
Yeah. It's kind of funny, my mom and dad's story, though. When we first started, my mom thought I was going to jail and that we were completely nuts. And then a couple years into it, my dad turns to my mom and he says, "You know what? I think Rob's got it figured out." And then last year he turned to my mom and said, "You know what? I'd like to help Rob get this thing done." So, my mom and dad are completely turned right around and absolutely convinced that this is the way to go, and they congratulated me and were quite proud of the film on Grip as well too. We had them over when we were watching it the day it was launched, and that's a complete flip from what their opinions were when we first started this project. And a lot of my friends, they were really excited. We have a lot of support from a lot of people, and in fact we still get some friends donating stuff to us. Like, I just came back from Fort McMurray with about 3.5 lifts of lumber that were donated from a friend of mine who was working on the pipeline. And I don't know if a lot of people know about this, but a lot of things in the oil industry, it's actually cheaper to dig a hole and bury it than it is to reuse it or salvage it. So he took it home, and after 3 months he had collected 3.5 lifts of lumber. Well, that's worth a couple $1,000.
Oh my goodness.
That's just what we're dealing with up there. So
right. Well, good on your friend.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And lumber like that will help us with the greenhouse, and help us get a barn built and fencing and all kinds of stuff that we can use with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I have friends donating stuff all the time to help us develop more of what we're trying to do out here. And it's all about salvaging and doing the best I can with what we can collect from the wastes of the corporate world.
I think it's fair to say at this point that this isn't just about you and your family. This is the intention here is for your property to be used as a community learning facility of some sort. Would that be the right term for it?
Yeah, our intent is to become as self-sufficient as possible so we can take care of all of our basic necessities of life: food, clothing, shelter, social interaction with people, that kind of stuff. And because we're doing that, I also feel I have a duty to other people to help them. So if they're interested in doing having the same kind of lifestyle, then they're welcome to come out and experience it and learn and share. So part of this is getting the community together, and I've been talking about community now for 3 or 4 years now. And to me, community isn't building houses and structures and that kind of stuff. Community is my relationship with the people around me, and the community is my support structure. And as such, I also have a duty to that community. So if people within my community need help, then it's my duty and my responsibility to go and help them. The problem that I found when I was working in the city is that I was so busy running the hamster wheel to make money to pay my corporate obligations, my bills, that I didn't have time for anybody else. So I realized that removing my dependencies from those corporations meant that I didn't have to spend so much time making money. And as such, now I have a lot more free time to be able to help people. So I haven't actually had a full-time job in 5 years now. I do work here and there to pay the phone bill and the internet bill and that kind of stuff. But I can easily support my family on, $1,000, $2,000 a month.
Yeah, I suppose you're off grid with the exception of the internet.
Right. So I don't have all of those bills. I don't have the mortgages or any of that kind of stuff. So I don't need to work a $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $10,000 a month job. So because of that, I have lots of time to spend with my animals and to, have conversations like this with you, or, spend a few days and go help a buddy out to, re-roof his house, or, those kind of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
almost sounds like freedom.
Yeah, almost, eh? Imagine that.
That's pretty much all you can do is imagine it.
I imagined it, and I thought there's got to be a way. And I see so many people working 2, 3 jobs, both parents, the mother and the father working. This isn't life. How enjoyable is that? Well, I didn't really enjoy it, because when I was working, I was getting up at 6:30 in the morning, having a shower, eating, dealing with rush hour traffic, work 8, 10 hours a day, come home, eat, relax in front of the TV for a couple hours, and then go to bed. Well, that's not life.
Well, you just described the life of 20 million Canadians.
Sure. How many people enjoy it, though? How many people find satisfaction or, enjoyment out of that? And for me, working on relationships requires time. Well, if you don't have time, then how can you have healthy relationships? So there's a catch-22 here. So I found that since I quit my job and lived off-grid, I have way more time to work on my relationships than I ever did before. We homeschool our kids, so I'm around my wife and my kids a lot. And we have people come out and visit a lot. I thoroughly enjoy that. And, when I was depressed, I didn't spend any time with my kids, and I missed the first 5, 10 years of their life, and I'll never get that back.
Well, Rob, I want to get into how you emancipated yourself from the government, because this is extremely original. This is probably what your parents were concerned about. He's going to jail. You can't do this. Well, we'll talk about it after this short 2-minute break. Rob, tell us how you emancipated yourself from the government, because I think most people would say, you can't do that, it's impossible. That's fucked up.
Well, again, it all started with my wife coming home from school, and she came home and said, Rob, have you ever heard of this thing called a natural person? I didn't, and so I started looking it up, and at the time, the fellow by the name of Russ Perisky was teaching this stuff, and he's in D.C., and in fact, he's actually facing some jail time now.
We're supposed to make people feel comfortable with the idea of this, Rob.
Well, that's the risk of dealing with a group of people who don't like people who challenge them on what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And there's fear involved in this process, and this comes down to being very, very comfortable with who you are and your relationship. And I believe that my relationship with my Creator had a huge part in this process. And as such, I have a firm belief that I'm doing the right thing. And, my work in recovering from depression dealt with my emotional issues. And, I don't see fear as a negative or positive. It's a neutral emotion, just like joy or happiness or love or anger or any of those kind of feelings. My reaction to those emotions is what turns it into a positive or a negative experience. So fear is an important part of this, because it helps me to be consciously aware of how I'm feeling, because it could be pointing out something to be aware of. And so I depend on my emotions a lot when I'm dealing with removing myself from the government. So how I did it, over the last 7 years, I've been doing a lot of research, so I'll kind of boil it down to some simple concepts. First off, I found a Supreme Court ruling back in 1998 in regards to Quebec separating. The Supreme Court ruled that a democracy is, let me make sure I word this properly. The consent of the governed is a foundational principle behind a democracy. And for me, I started asking a lot of questions, and I thought the word consent was an important word in that ruling. And my research and my view on the word consent means that it's a free will choice on whether we agree to be governed by somebody else or not. Now, if you talk to a CRA agent or RCMP officer or any of these agents, they're going to suggest that you do not have that free will choice, and you better follow their instructions or else. Now, what I've done is I've essentially went through the process and figured out, well, there's this interesting thing called sovereignty. The natural person stuff really didn't resonate with me because the word person comes from the word persona, which means a mask. And I didn't really feel like wearing a mask anymore. And my view is that a lot of the people that are holding a position like a judge or a police officer or a CRA agent or a politician, any of those kind of people, they're all wearing masks. And I found this concept called the corporation soul, which the Governor General is, and I also found out the Queen is as well, and the Lieutenant Governor. Now, all of these positions are corporation souls, and what a corporation soul is a man who wraps a corporation around himself to become one. So when you identify or reference the corporation, you're also referencing the man. If you reference the man, you're also referencing the corporation. Now, a corporation comes from the word corpus, which is a dead body. And so these people are wrapping dead bodies around themselves, putting masks on, and pretending to be what they're not. And it's all a fiction. And in my view, it's also all a lie. So I decided that I didn't want to have this dead body wrapped around me and wear a mask anymore, because my view is, from my research, is that each and every one of us is a corporation soul when we are participating in the system. And that happens when you are a driver, or if you are a voter, or if you are a taxpayer, or a owner, or any of these other terms or words that the state has defined in their statutes and regulations. And it all comes down to the word person. And, the courts are even ruling that a natural person, which is supposed to identify the man, is now the same as an artificial person, which is a corporation. And that's kind of the premise that Russ Perisky was going by when I was learning from him. I don't know if he's changed that much because I stopped studying his stuff a few years ago, but the courts are doing everything they can to prevent the truth from coming out. But my view is, the truth is that we consent to all of this, and we have a right to self-determination, and we have a God-given right to be free and to not have somebody else govern us. So what I've done is I realize that this relationship that we have with government is very, very similar to what a child has with their parents. Now, parents use privileges and benefits to raise the child. And the benefits could be, food, clothing, shelter, all that kind of stuff. Privileges could be, going to school, or, being able to stay up late on a weekend, or, those kind of things. And if the child misbehaves, then you just revoke some privileges. They get their iPod taken away, or they can't use the internet or the computer, or, those kind of things. Well, what I realized when I went through this process is that when I moved away from home, I may have been physically mature, but I definitely was not emotionally or mentally mature. And as such, I looked for another parent, and that parent was the state. And I then became dependent on the state and the corporations to help look after me. And those benefits and privileges that the state offers is things like employment insurance or health care or pensions or those kind of stuff, right? And we all pay into those in order to receive those benefits and privileges. And if you don't follow their rules, then they take some of those away. They use the same kind of techniques that a parent uses. And so I decided that if I was going to be physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually mature, then it was time for me to take responsibility in all aspects of my life. And as such, I then put the state on notice that I was going to be responsible, and I no longer accept any benefits or privileges from the state in that regard.
Okay, so how did that happen? You sent them a letter?
Yeah, well, what I did is I realized that, through my research, people in the United States were sovereign based on the Declaration of Independence of 1776. And there's a lot of people down there that are working at getting their sovereignty back because they essentially walked away from their sovereignty by signing up for all these benefits and privileges. But we didn't have anything like that up here in Canada because Canada is still under the Crown. And so I realized, well, if it worked for them, it should work for me. So what I did is I took the Declaration of Independence, reworded it a bit, because in it there was a declaration of war, and I wanted to declare peace. I wanted to declare peace with them and with my fellow man, because I didn't want to be at war anymore. And I believe that holding any kind of government issued documentation is a evidence of you holding a military office. So I wanted to declare peace, and so I reworded the declaration. I also served them with a fee schedule and a claim of right, mainly because these people don't understand or don't talk English to us. They talk legalese. And one language that they do understand is money, because they're all corporations, and corporations operate in the model of scarcity, and their primary function is to create profits. And so I realized that probably the only language they would understand is money. Now the problem...
So you paid them off?
No, not at all. I didn't pay them off at all.
Okay.
What I did is I served them with a notice and said, if you want to interact with me, this is going to be my fee schedule. This is how much it's going to cost you to interact with me. The problem was that the word money is an issue too, because Canadian dollars isn't actually money. It's a fiat currency. There's actually no value to it. It's all debt-based instruments. And I decided that I would use silver, which is a real tangible commodity, as my form of money. And so any bills that I send the state is for silver, not Canadian dollars. And, through the years, there's been a few interactions, and so I've sent bills, and, the Governor General owes me 53 million ounces of silver. The Lieutenant Governor owes me about the same. So...
You bill pretty high. What's the charges for?
Well, I bill... My fee schedule is 1,000 ounces of silver per piece of paper. So if they want to send me a letter or anything like that, that's how much it's going to cost them.
Mm-hmm.
It's 500,000 ounces of silver if they walk onto my land, or if they detain me, or take my truck, or any of that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So the price is pretty steep.
Do I have to pay you silver if I go onto your property, Rob?
No, because most private people would respect me and call me before they come and make arrangements to come. And I also have a notice on the gate as well, too. So if somebody did want to drop by and they were being disrespectful and that kind of stuff, then I would apply the fee schedule to them as well, too.
Have the government paid you anything?
Not yet, no. But they left me alone. So,
right, yeah.
You know, it's important to establish the relationship, and all relationships need boundaries. And a lot of people don't have boundaries when it comes to the state. And as such, when you're dealing with somebody that doesn't have boundaries, just like a child, if you don't set boundaries up for the child, they're just going to keep pushing and pushing and pushing until they're ruling the roost. And children need boundaries. Relationships need boundaries. And so I establish those boundaries. And when they push those boundaries, I let them know that what they did is inappropriate. Sometimes I have to do that through writing, and sometimes I have to do that face to face.
But this is Crown land. All land in Canada is ultimately the ownership of the Crown.
Yeah, actually, you're much closer to the truth than you realize.
Well, that's what they taught us in school. Now, I don't suggest to think that they teach us anything in school, but I do remember them mentioning that.
What I found, and this was just like a month ago, is that the current system is actually running very much like the old feudal system in England. And many people say, oh, we don't have a feudal system. But the truth is I found Supreme Court rulings that says that, for example, when PEI came into Confederation, all the land was then moved into the manor. And in a feudal system, you have a lord of the manor, and the tenants are responsible for paying rent to the lord of the manor. And if you take a look at your title, it's just a piece of paper to begin with, but in there it will list a person, and the corporation, not the man, and it will also list the person as a tenant. And your rent is what they call property taxes. So you're right. They do consider all the land to be under the ownership of the Crown. My question is, which Crown are you talking about? Are you talking about the Queen of England and right of Alberta, the Queen of England and right of Canada? Are you talking about the Crown in regards to the City of London, like where the financial district is? Are you talking about the Pope? Like, I really don't know which Crown we're dealing with here. And so when I serve notice to the Crown, I serve notice to the Pope, to the Secretary General of the UN, to the Queen, Governor General, Lieutenant Governor, Premier, Prime Minister, Solicitor General, Attorney General, all the way down to the local county. And, you know, I'm doing what I can to say, hey, you know what, guys? The real authority is the people, not you. And I even have people, friends that are looking at identifying themselves as the head of state when they're dealing with the Crown. Because if the people are the head, then you and I are the head of state. And as such, we are the boss and they are the servant. That's why they're called civil servants. And that relationship should work that way, in my view. The Queen, for example, if she has a servant that's given her some trouble, she wouldn't put up with this kind of behavior. So why do we put up with this kind of behavior?
Why indeed. We need to take a final break here, Rob. So we'll come back with our final segment with Rob and the Pagé family in 2 minutes.
On the next episode of The West Coast Truth with Russell Scott.
And when we return, I'm going to play a YouTube clip that claims that you're full of shit.
Oh, that'll be exciting.
Daniel, I'm very excited because you're coming to town.
Yeah, I'm coming there December the 2nd and 3rd, and you're going to be my co-presenter. So, Truth in the West and Russell.
You don't even know the name of the show, Daniel. It's The West Coast Truth.
Yes, I do. I was going to say it. Russell and the West Coast Truth and Daniel Debunked.
The West Coast Truth with Russell Scott.
People always pigeonhole me into the dead guy.
Yeah, it's a dancing monkey thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, just turning the chime.
Yeah.
Season 4.
We're back with Rob from the Pagé family. Thank you very much for your time today, by the way, Rob. It's a pretty interesting story.
I appreciate the opportunity to share the story.
So what do you do about stuff like SIN numbers, your taxes? You pay taxes? Do people pay taxes to you?
People don't pay taxes to me. What I did is I recognized that, the government is a corporation. Corporations are corporations, obviously. And because I'm dealing with dead bodies and masks, all of these are fictions. It's all make-believe. And so I wanted to get real and only deal with reality a bit here. And as such, I decided that I didn't want to participate in the fiction anymore. And so I sent everything back. I sent the birth certificate back, driver's license, registration, SIN number, Alberta healthcare card, marriage certificate, any documentation that was issued by the government is actually the property of the government. And as such, I felt that it wasn't for me to be holding on to their property.
I just want to add a note here. If you look at one of the large birth certificates, the older ones that are about 5x3 or something, they're printed on stock paper, printed on the same material that they print money with.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, it's true. It's because it's actually a stock certificate.
It's a valuable security.
If you look at that, it actually says in the very bottom right-hand corner, printed on banknote paper.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Kind of an interesting piece of trivia. Carry on.
Well, and even the new ones are printed on that same plastic as the new plastic $100 bills are printed on now, too. So
there you go.
So anyway, I sent it all back. I didn't actually get any objection from anybody except for Service Canada. Service Canada sent me a letter saying, well, you need this if you're doing activities which are employable earnings or employable or taxable income, or I can't remember the exact terminology they use, or if you are hiring somebody to do your taxes, or they kind of listed off a few qualifiers there, and I realized, well.
And this is for your social insurance number?
For the SIN card, right?
Okay.
And I realized, well, none of that applies to me. So I folded up the letter and I shipped it back and said, well,
it's 1,000 ounces of silver.
Yeah, I sent a bill with it too. Yeah, absolutely. It was about 2 or 3 ounces, 3,000 ounces of silver, because I also include the envelope. The envelope is a piece of paper too, right? But I haven't heard from them since when I did that. But I do pay taxes. Like I still pay taxes when I buy fuel for my truck, or when I buy equipment in a hardware store or parts or that kind of stuff. So people often challenge me, well, what about the roads and how do we pay for the infrastructure? And the reality is the taxes from fuel more than cover the investments in infrastructure, and in fact they collect about 75% more than what they need, so the rest just goes into general coffers. So
or the military.
Or the military. Well, general coffers covers healthcare and military and all the traditional expenditures that the government puts on, but in the end, I don't use a hospital, I don't use their healthcare system, I don't use any of the services that they're providing.
Let's say, for example, you got shot. That's a big problem, having a bullet inside you. So sure. What would you do? Would you go to the hospital?
Well, I probably would, but at that point I would pay for it myself. I'm responsible for my health, and so as such, if I'm going to depend on somebody else to help me, I'm responsible for those costs.
Now, do we have those kinds of options here in Canada?
Well, I think what the public would do is they have a duty, and they would help me whether I had the money or not. And but the fact of the matter is I don't have a healthcare card, so they're not going to get any of that information from me. And so at this point, I'm responsible for ensuring that I can pay for that visit if or when it should happen. And, this all comes down to, me being responsible for making sure that I have the resources to be able to do that. Now, if I don't, then, my belief is that's where community comes in. And, like 100 years ago, or even 80 years ago, my grandfather lost his barn to a tornado. Well, they didn't have insurance or anything like that back then. But what they did have is they had strong community. And so the community got together and built his barn. And I believe that that's what it's all about. And, the insurance companies just love getting in there and scaring the shit out of people in order for them to profit from people's fears of certain events happening. And so part of what I teach is mitigating risk. And if we can take a look at the things that happen in our lives and objectively consider what the probability of the events occurring and what the impact is, we can actually take active measures to mitigate the risk so that we can reduce the probability or reduce the impact so that the costs or the implications of these events aren't going to be near as high. And the example I like to use is when we're dealing with people on our streets. The liability for everybody is on a corporation. So if anything happens, who pays? The insurance company. The driver may pay, a few $1,000s a year, but the real liability is on the insurance company. So what incentive is there for them to be responsible for their actions? Very little. And I believe that's why we have so much carnage on our streets. However, if people were to use the streets and they were 100% responsible and 100% accountable, do you think their behaviors would change?
But there are accidents without fault.
And that's where community comes in. Whether the community is going to help one another out or anything like that, it'll be up to us on figuring that out. However, there are still a lot of things that people can do to mitigate the impact. For example, I moved out of the city. I also don't travel on the highways much either. And I don't commute every day. In fact, I don't commute at all. In fact,
you do drive. I mean, you mentioned your truck.
Well, I don't drive. I travel because driving is a commercial activity. And this is, part of the word game that the government likes to play. So I don't drive. I travel. And in fact, driver's licenses actually were invented before cars. Did you know that?
No.
Do you know who was issued the first driver's license?
No.
A cowboy. Because a cowboy would be driving cattle. And they needed that driver's license because the cattle could run over somebody's lawn while they were driving the cattle from one pasture to another and cause damage to the guy's property. So when they were driving cattle, they would need a liability insurance in order to do it. But when they weren't driving cattle, they were riding. That's why, you see in the movies, let's ride. You don't need a license to ride, but you do need a license to drive. And that commercial activity is to provide, or the license is to provide a remedy in case that commercial activity causes damage to somebody's property.
Cool.
So I take active steps and measures to ensure that I do no harm and I do not force my will upon somebody else. But that requires that I take 100% responsibility and accountability. And so if there's an activity that is a high-risk activity, I'm just not going to do it.
Well, what would happen if you got pulled over? Or has this ever happened? License and registration, please.
Well, in Ungrip, I actually talk about when I got pulled over. And that was back in 2007, I believe. Yeah. And the court case was in 2008. And I beat that case. And the police, since then, for 50 months, they would follow me, they would take pictures. Like they have police cars now that have cameras on the top of their cars, so they drive up and down parking lots and streets, photographing license plates so that they can run it against their database looking for stolen vehicles, all that kind of stuff. They would follow me for like 25 blocks, and they would leave me alone every single time. What's interesting, though, is when Ungrip came out in January, they didn't stop me. So I'm not sure if it's because of the film or whatever, but
They leave you alone.
They leave me alone.
How did you beat that case?
What I did is I recognized that the charge was to the person, not to me, the man. And I believe that the relationship between the state and the individual is a trust relationship, and they're looking for a trustee to pay the bill. And so they play games, name games, all that kind of stuff. But if you know who you are and you know how to go to court, then you can put the onus on them, and at that point they can't get that contractual joinder. And so when I walked into court, like I said in the film, I walked in as a third-party intervener. I was intervening in the case, but I wasn't admitting it to being the person, but I was harmed in it because I was detained for an hour and a half. And because I knew what to say in court and how to play their game a bit, they couldn't get that joinder, so they just dropped charges without so much of a fight. So, when they stopped me in January, I sent them the fee schedules or the fees due to a violation, and I'm not even going to court anymore, and they're proceeding with the case without me.
Do you worry about your safety or your freedom being imprisoned?
No, I don't. I used to, but that's a fear response again, and I know who I am, and I'm very comfortable with my relationship with the state, very comfortable with my relationship with myself and with my creator, and as such, I'm not concerned about being detained or being put in jail or anything like that. And if I am, then my view is I have something to learn from the experience, and I'll just go through it and do the best I can. But I don't have any concerns about that at all.
Do you think the state respects you or those who sign up for social insurance numbers?
I personally think the state respects me. The state is getting very, very nasty with other people, but I have to admit the state has been very respectful of me. They leave me alone. They don't harass me or bother me. I have a few interactions now and again, but it's always been peaceful because I declared my peace. I'm not at war, so there is no threat to them. There is no issue for them to be concerned about because I declared my peace. And I believe because of that, I don't threaten them in any way. And they leave me alone because of it. They'll test me every once in a while, but it's been very minor in my experience. But I can't say that for other people.
Do you think it's imperative to move to the country, or can people unplug while living in the city?
I think it's really difficult to do it in the city because all the houses in there are plugged into the grid. And I believe that the structure that we live in is a core component of my freedom. And you can start the process, you can go partway through, but for me, I have a real hard time trying to imagine how an individual could disconnect the house completely from the grid and deal with everything on such a small parcel of land. Like, how can you grow all of your food, and how can you treat all your waste and collect water and do all that kind of stuff on such small pieces of land?
Well, here in Vancouver, they've allowed us to raise chickens in our backyard if we wish.
Oh, good. Well, I heard Edmonton is going to start doing the same. Just in a recent article in the newspaper, they're seriously considering it. So I actually just held a class a couple weeks ago talking about urban chickens and different designs of chicken coops and what to watch out for, that kind of stuff, because we do raise chickens ourselves, right? So I held a class on specifically that topic.
You ever had your chickens eaten by dogs or coyotes?
Coyotes, hawks, ravens. I'm living with nature. I have to respect that and appreciate that, there's going to be an interaction. And so, I raise extra chickens, and that way if, the coyotes or the hawks get a few, then, they're just doing what they do. So it's no sense getting upset or mad about it. So just go with the flow, right?
I think a lot of people would probably like to get on board with this kind of a program. And you're certainly available to help them through it, to talk to them, to serve as a mentor to them.
Yeah, I'm just a normal guy, and I'm just trying to figure out life just like everybody else. For me, I'll share my experience, and I believe that I can't change anybody because of free will, but I can influence people, and I influence people by walking a path and sharing my story. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. And if people resonate with what I do, or with the way I think, or any of that kind of stuff, then wonderful. If they don't resonate with it, wonderful. Either way, it doesn't really matter to me. I'm going to walk my path, whatever people think. And so if they want to, ask me questions or, learn more about what I'm doing, then I set up a website. My website's called consciousselfgovernance.ca. The film Ungrip that you talked about, that Ben and I did, is a wonderful introduction to the work that I do. So if this is all new to them, or, they're just starting to hear about this kind of stuff, then, watch Ungrip. It's on YouTube. It's free. You can watch it. It's about an hour and 15 minutes. I kind of cover the Earthship stuff. I cover a little bit of some legal things I found out about what Canada is all about. And, the whole premise of the show is to govern the self rather than being governed by other people. And that's the whole premise of what I'm trying to teach, is to govern the self. And that's why I call it conscious self-governance.
Now, on your website, you have a public and a private section.
I recognize that the public is vulnerable and that they need protecting, just like what the government roles and responsibilities are. So what I did is I split it up. And so on the public side, I have some documents, and I have links to a lot of research sites that I went to when I was doing my own research. All the information is there if they wanted to go and learn this themselves. So nobody can accuse me of selling the information or any of that kind of stuff, because it's all there. All the information that I've learned, I got online, or I went to a law library. I just had to spend the time. However, if you want to learn more about my experiences and, the lessons that I learned and all that kind of stuff, what I've done is I set up a private side for members only. And in there you'll find a workshop that I did. It's a weekend workshop. I call it Journey Towards Truth, where I cover all the legal stuff and living off grid, and I share my experiences with dealing with the state in regards to, development permits and, courts and driver's licenses and, all that kind of stuff. And that workshop is online, as well as I, on occasion, hold workshops in Edmonton or Calgary. I've also been to Toronto as well. So if there's enough people interested, I'd be willing to travel to hold a workshop for a group of people. I hold classes each week online, and I record those classes. So if members miss a class, or they want to, cover the class again, or, that kind of stuff, it's all archived on the private side of the website. I also have a forum there, so people can start sharing and helping one another, trying to build community of like-minded individuals, and so that we can get the support to people, the support that I didn't have when I was going through all of this. And that's all on the private side of the website.
Well, I'm going to place a link on the bottom of my website, www.westcoasttruth.com. That'll link over to your website so people don't even have to Google it.
Yeah, what you can do is if you're on the public side of the website, you can sign up for my newsletter. I write a newsletter each week.
Perfect.
And in the newsletter, I talk about current events or ideas. My next one, I'm going to be talking about smart meters and what people can do regarding the smart meters that they're putting in and some of the concerns of smart meters. I also talk about the upcoming classes that I hold, and so the project that I'm working on, workshops. So if there's any new stuff coming up, like I was advertised to my members and people who signed up for the newsletter about this interview as well too. So any interviews, I'll be in Banff in May to present on GRIP to the Natural Healthcare Practitioners Association of Canada, I think is their name. So that there's lots of things going on. So people want to keep in touch and be updated. The news flyer and the website is the best way to do it.
Okay, so link to Rob's website from the bottom of westcoasttruth.com. Sign up for the newsletter. And Rob, if you're ever in the area, we'll come out and see what you do. If you ever come down to the coast.
Yeah, well, I have a few people that are still interested in trying to get me down there for a workshop. So who knows, maybe sometime this summer. It hasn't really panned out yet, but I'm sure.
How many people do you need for a workshop?
I usually recommend anywhere from 10 to 25 people. Anything more than that, I find the relationship within the group changes, and I like to keep it very personal. So I would do it for that.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what. Listeners out there, if you're interested in having Rob come down here and doing a workshop, why don't you send me a letter at editor.westcoasttruth@hotmail.com and express your interest in seeing Rob and the Pagé family have a workshop here in the West Coast. Sound good?
Wonderful.
All right, man. Hey, I really appreciate your time today.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you very much for allowing me to share my story and, reaching people that I may not necessarily be able to reach. I greatly appreciate the work that you do, and thank you very much for spending the time with me. Time is one of the best gifts you can give somebody, and I appreciate the gift of time. Thank you.
And thank you for being on the West Coast Truth.